The real estate closing had already happened. Papers signed, deed transferred, keys handed over. When the patent attorney called me on a Thursday afternoon and said, in the careful, measured voice of someone delivering information they suspect is going to change everything. Miss Calloway, I want to make sure you're aware that the workshop property your uncle sold last month contains a registered patent fixture. Specifically, a custom fabricated precision milling setup your father filed under a provisional patent application 18 months before he died. That application matured into a full utility patent 8 weeks ago. The equipment cannot be legally separated from the patent holder's estate without explicit written authorization. And the patent holder's estate, Miss Calloway, is you. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I received that call, eating a sandwich I had made without paying attention to what I was putting in it. In the particular automatic way you eat things during the weeks after a parent dies, when feeding yourself feels like an administrative task rather than something you're actually present for. I set the sandwich down. Say that again, I said. All of it. From the beginning. Before I tell you what the patent covered, and what my uncle had sold without my knowledge or consent, and what the buyer, a machine shop owner from 2 counties over who had paid $62,000 for what he believed was an unremarkable workshop full of old equipment, discovered when the patent attorney's letter arrived at his door 3 days after mine. Tell me, where are you watching? From right now? What time is it where you are? I read every single comment, and I mean that genuinely. And I want to be clear before we go further. This is a work of fiction, written for entertainment. The names, the people, the events, none of it is real, and any resemblance to anyone living is entirely coincidental. My name is Claire Calloway. I'm 33 years old, and I grew up watching my father, Raymond, work. Not in the abstract way that children sometimes grow up aware that a parent has a job. I mean literally watching him, specifically, with the particular absorbed attention of a child who finds the thing her parent does genuinely fascinating, rather than simply familiar. My father was a machinist. A genuine, old-school precision machinist who had learned his trade in a manufacturing plant at 18 and spent the following 30 years developing a level of skill that, by the time I was old enough to understand what I was watching, had become something considerably rarer and more valuable than the title suggested. He had built his workshop in the detached garage behind our house when I was 7 years old. Over the following 26 years, he had filled it, gradually and deliberately, with equipment he had either purchased, rebuilt, or in several cases fabricated himself. A manual lathe he had restored from a rusted shell, a vertical milling machine he had spent 14 months modifying, a custom precision grinding setup he had designed and built entirely from scratch over the course of 3 years. Working weekends, because the commercially available versions didn't meet the tolerances he needed for the specialized work he had begun taking on in his final decade. That custom grinding setup was, I would learn from the patent attorney, the subject of the utility patent. My father had apparently developed a specific mechanical configuration, a combination of spindle design, coolant delivery system, and workpiece positioning mechanism that solved a precision problem in a specific category of aerospace component, finishing that existing commercial equipment handled inadequately. He had filed a provisional patent application 18 months before his death, working with the attorney quietly, without telling me, in the particular way he did certain things that he considered still in progress and not yet worth mentioning. He had died before the application matured. The patent had been granted 8 weeks after his death to his estate, which meant to me, his only heir, his sole beneficiary under a will that was entirely unambiguous, and that had been filed with the county and confirmed by our estate attorney within 2 weeks of his passing. My uncle Gerald, my father's younger brother, who had never, in my memory, shown any particular interest in my father's workshop or its contents, had apparently been paying considerably more attention than I realized. Gerald was 56 years old, a regional sales manager for a building materials company, a man I had known my entire life and had always categorized, without much active thought, as simply present. a reliable attendee of family events, a sender of birthday cards, someone who existed in the peripheral zone of family life without ever becoming particularly central to it. What I had not known, what I would piece together later through a combination of our estate attorney's investigation and a conversation with my father's next-door neighbor, a retired engineer named Howard who had, it turned out, been watching the workshop with considerably more attention than anyone had realized, was that Gerald had known about the patent application, not the specific technical details. I don't believe Gerald understood what a spindle configuration was or why the coolant delivery system mattered. But he had known because my father had mentioned it to him in passing at a family gathering approximately a year before his death, that Raymond was working on something he had filed paperwork on and that might be worth money eventually. Gerald had, apparently, filed that information away, the way certain people file away information about other people's potential assets, and had been monitoring the patent application's progress through the USPTO's public database. When my father died and the estate process began, Gerald had moved quickly. He had contacted me within the first week, offering, generously, he framed it, helpfully, to handle the sale of the workshop contents so I wouldn't have to deal with that particular administrative burden during what was clearly a difficult time. I had said yes. I was grieving. I trusted him. He was family. Gerald had sold the workshop. The entire contents, including my father's custom grinding setup, the patent-encumbered equipment, the 30 years of accumulated precision tooling, to a machine shop owner named Dale Patterson for $62,000, pocketing the full proceeds without informing me, without accounting for them in the estate, and without disclosing to Dale that any of the equipment was subject to a pending patent application. He had done all of this in the 6-week window between my father's death and the patent's formal grant date, apparently calculating, correctly, that the provisional application was not yet publicly visible in a way that would flag immediately during a standard property sale. What he had not calculated was the patent attorney. My father's patent attorney, a methodical woman named Patricia Wells who had been managing the application for 18 months, had sent formal notification of the patent grant to my father's address, which had been forwarded to me as a state representative. The letter had arrived in a stack of other estate correspondence that I had been processing slowly, the way you process paperwork when you are simultaneously grief-stricken and administratively overwhelmed. I had opened it on a Thursday. I had read it without fully understanding it. I had called Patricia Wells, whose number was on the letterhead, and she had explained, in the careful, measured voice I described at the beginning of this story, exactly what I was holding. A utility patent, in my father's name, assigned to his estate, covering the specific mechanical configuration of the custom grinding setup that Gerald had sold to Dale Patterson 6 weeks earlier for $62,000. The equipment cannot be legally operated for commercial purposes without a license from the patent holder, Patricia told me, and it cannot be sold without the patent holder's authorization. If Mr. Patterson is currently using that equipment in his machine shop, and given that he paid $62,000 for it, I would assume he is. He is currently in infringement. That is not his fault. He didn't know. But the person who sold it to him without disclosing the patent application, that person has a significant legal problem. I sat at my kitchen table with my half-eaten sandwich and my father's patent grant letter, and I thought about Gerald. Helpful, generous Gerald, who had offered to handle the workshop sale so I wouldn't have to. And I felt something settle inside me with the specific, cold clarity of a situation that has just become unambiguous. I called Sandra Perkins. Sandra reviewed the situation with characteristic efficiency. The patent grant, the estate documentation confirming my sole beneficiary status, the sale records Gerald had provided to the estate attorney showing the $62,000 transaction, and a brief, illuminating conversation with Howard, the retired engineer next door, who had watched the entire workshop clearance from his kitchen, window and had, with the particular observational habit of a man who spent 30 years paying precise attention to technical processes, noted the specific equipment that had been removed, when, and by whom. Howard had also, it turned out, known about the grinding setup specifically. My father had shown it to him 2 years earlier, with the particular pride of someone who has solved a genuinely difficult problem, and Howard had understood immediately what he was looking at. That setup, Howard told Sandra in his written statement, was not standard equipment. Raymond designed and built the core mechanism himself. I watched him do it for over 3 years. There is nothing commercially available that does what that machine does at those tolerances. I told him at the time it was worth protecting. I'm glad he listened. Sandra filed a civil complaint against Gerald for conversion of estate assets, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The last charge applicable because Gerald had represented himself to me as acting on the estate's behalf. She simultaneously sent a letter to Dale Patterson explaining the patent situation and offering, on my behalf, a licensing arrangement that would allow him to continue using the equipment commercially at a reasonable royalty rate rather than facing infringement proceedings. An offer Dale accepted within 48 hours with visible relief and which generated, over the following 3 years, considerably more income than the $62,000 one-time sale would have. Gerald's attorney, upon reviewing the documentation Sandra had assembled, the patent grant, Howard's statement, the sale records, the USPTO filing timeline, apparently advised him fairly quickly that his position was not defensible. Gerald had known about the patent application. He had moved specifically to sell the equipment before the grant date. The timeline was documented and unambiguous. He settled. The full $62,000, plus legal fees, plus a percentage of the first year's licensing revenue that Sandra had argued constituted damages for the lost licensing opportunity during the 6 weeks between the sale and my discovery of it. Total recovery, approximately $87,000. Gerald and I have not spoken since the settlement. I don't imagine we will. The licensing arrangement with Dale Patterson continues. He turned out to be, underneath the uncomfortable circumstances of our introduction, a genuinely decent man. A third-generation machinist himself. Someone who recognized immediately what my father had built and who told me, at our first in-person meeting to sign the licensing documents, that the grinding setup was the most precisely engineered piece of equipment he had seen in 30 years of running a machine shop. Your father knew what he was doing, Dale told me. Yes, I said. He did. I have my father's workshop back. Not the physical space, which has been sold and belongs to Dale now, but the thing that actually mattered. The thing my father spent 3 years building and 18 months protecting, and that my uncle spent 6 weeks trying to quietly take. The patent. The recognition. The proof, documented and filed and legally protected, is that Raymond Calloway built something genuinely worth protecting. I keep a copy of the patent grant letter framed on my wall. It has my father's name on it. Underneath his name, in the specific technical language of a utility patent grant, is a description of the thing he made. I don't fully understand the technical language, but I understand what it means. It means he was right. It means he was always worth paying attention to. Do you think Gerald deserved criminal charges rather than just a civil settlement? Or was the financial recovery the more meaningful consequence? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, subscribe to the Family Ledger for a brand new story every single day. Hit that bell. You do not want to miss what is coming next.